Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Today I've got a 41 game benchmark for you guys comparing the GeForce RTX 2060 Super and Radeon RX 5700 head to head. This big benchmark comparison includes some new titles such as Borderlands 3, Gears 5 and Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Breakpoint. All the results featured in this video are brand new. They were gathered last week using the latest display drivers as well as the latest game versions. Now, representing AMD, we have the Power Color Red Devil 5700. Big old graphics card, that one. And then for Nvidia, we have the MSI RTX 2060 Super. But before we get too far into this video, today's video is sponsored by Gigabyte and their complete lineup of PCIe Gen 4 hardware. Not only do they offer a strong top-down lineup of X570 motherboards, but they've also got you covered on the graphics card front as well, with models such as the recently reviewed 5700 XT Gaming OC offering exceptional thermal performance. And for storage, there's the super snappy Aorus NVMe Gen 4 SSD, available in either 1 or 2 terabyte capacities. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, so the Red Devil is a premium 5700 that comes in at $390 US, but we've already established that in terms of FPS performance, it's no faster than base model AIB cards. And the same is largely true for the Gaming X. It comes in at $430 US, but for example, you will get very similar performance from MSI's $410 Ventus OC. Going on the AMD and Nvidia MSRPs, the RX 5700 comes in at $350 US and the 2060 Super at $400 US. I'll go over the pricing information in a bit more detail towards the end of the video, and we'll also discuss some alternative options as well. But for now, let's see how these two GPUs compare in a massive range of games using our Core i9 1900K GPU test rig, which has been overclocked to 5 GHz and features 16GB of DDR4 3400 memory. All testing takes place at 1080p and 1440p, and as usual, rather than go over all 41 graphs here, we'll look at around a dozen closely and then jump to our performance breakdown graph, which will look at all 41 games. And for detailed performance results for any of the graphs that we don't look at here, please jump over to our Patreon page where you can find all 41 graphs for free. Kickstarting the benchmarks, we have Borderlands 3, and here the Radeon RX 5700 offers the highest frame rates at both tested resolutions, though the margins aren't exactly huge. The 5700 is 6% faster at 1080p and 10% faster at 1440p, though admittedly at 1440p the margin is starting to get reasonably large, and you will actually notice that 14% increase in 1% low performance. Moving on, the Radeon GPU was also faster when testing with Gears 5, as it enjoys up to a 10% performance margin at 1080p. The results were more competitive at 1440p, and while we do see the same 1% low performance, the 5700 was a whisker faster when comparing the average frame rate. The 2060 Super gets its first win in Ghost Recon Breakpoint, providing 7% more performance at 1080p. That said, the margin was neutralized at 1440p, and here both GPUs averaged just over 70 FPS. It's worth noting that upon release, the Radeon RX 5700 was 31% faster than the 2060 Super when testing with Forza Horizon 4. However, a recent Nvidia driver boosted performance by around 20 to 25% for the Turing-based GPUs, and as a result, the 5700 is now just 8% faster. Though I should note that both GPUs did push over 100 FPS at both 1080p and 1440p, so performance is obviously excellent no matter which GPU you go with. World War Z has seen a couple of performance-related updates over the past few months, but these updates haven't changed the margins between AMD and Nvidia GPUs. The 5700 is still 11% faster on average at 1080p and 8% faster at 1440p. The Battlefield 5 results are extremely competitive. Here the 5700 was just a frame faster at 1080p and only 5% faster at 1440p, so overall a very similar gaming experience using either GPU. Nvidia generally enjoys a performance advantage in Apex Legends, and we see exactly that here when comparing the 5700 and 2060 Super. The GeForce GPU was 9% faster at 1080p and 7% faster at 1440p. Still a clear win for the green team. I'd be quite surprised by these results if we hadn't recently seen similar margins when comparing the RTX 2070 Super and 5700 XT. AMD appears to do very well in Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and here the 5700 was 16% faster at 1080p and 8% faster at 1440p. Of course, we're seeing frame rates well over 200 FPS at both tested resolutions, so how much these margins matter, well, I'll leave that up to you to decide. F1 2019 provides very competitive results. The 2060 Super was a few frames faster at 1080p, while we see basically identical performance at 1440p. Both GPUs maintained well over 60 FPS at 1440p, so very respectable performance here. Another title to show very competitive results is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. The 2060 Super was just a few frames faster, but again an identical gaming experience. The 2060 Super nudged ahead in Wolfenstein Youngblood, delivering 6% more performance at 1080p and 9% more performance at 1440p. So not massive margins, and both GPUs did push over 100 FPS at all times, even at 1440p. Fortnite is a mega popular title, and you'll see strong frame rates with either the 5700 or 2060 Super. The GeForce GPU was 6% faster at 1080p, though the 1% low performance was basically identical, and then at 1440p we see up to just a 4% margin in favour of the green team. Strange Brigade was a title that AMD used to dominate in. In the case of the 2060 Super versus the 5700, Nvidia's actually in the lead, beating the $350 Radeon GPU by a 9% margin. PUBG fans have always been best served by GeForce GPUs, and that still remains the situation even today. The 2060 Super was around 17% faster at both tested resolutions, and you will notice that extra performance. That said, if you play with competitive settings, the frame rates will be so high it probably won't matter which GPU you use. The Radeon GPU suffered a rather weak 1% low performance at 1080p when testing with Project Cars 2, and this data is of course based on a 3-run average, and in this instance all 3 passes reported the same 63 FPS for the 1% low. Despite the poor 1% low performance, the average frame rate was comparable to that of the 2060 Super, and we do see more competitive performance overall at 1440p. Okay, so last up we're going to look at World of Tanks, and this one goes in favour of Nvidia, as the 2060 Super delivers 7% more performance at 1080p and 11% more at 1440p. You won't notice this difference at 1080p, but at 1440p you might notice the extra frames with the 2060 Super, depending on how sensitive you are. It's hard to say which GPU had the upper hand in that sample of games. It certainly seemed to go back and forth quite a bit, and for the most part I really think the margins were very small. Still, we've only looked at around a dozen games, I think just over a dozen of the titles tested, so let's see how these two GPUs compare across all 41 games at both 1080p and 1440p. Okay, so at 1080p, across the 41 games tested, the GeForce RTX 2060 Super was found to be just 3% faster on average. The only real outlier here was Vermintide 2, where the 2060 Super was 34% faster, but even if we remove that result entirely, the GeForce GPU was still 3% faster on average, and that's the beauty of testing with so many games. Outliers don't really impact the overall result. Moving to 1440p, and here we see the 2060 Super was found to be 4% faster on average when looking at all 41 games. So again, we're looking at less than a 5% margin overall, which means for the most part, performance is going to be very similar, and that's certainly what we saw when looking at a dozen or so of the games quite closely. Again, for all the graphs, please visit our Patreon page where you can view all of them for free. Okay, so for the cost per frame analysis, I'm going to use the MSRP, as it is possible to purchase either the 5700 or 2060 Super at these prices. Doing so means you'll be paying 12% more per frame for the GeForce GPU based on the 1080p data, or 11% more based on the 1440p results. Either way, what this means is, at the MSRP, the 2060 Super costs 14% more overall, and given the only very minor performance increase, it comes in at a little over a 10% price premium. Okay, so no real surprises there. Overall, the 2060 Super, it's a whisker faster, but the RX 5700 offers slightly more bang for your buck. Really though, I can't see you going wrong with either of these options. Now, at this point in the video, I bet there's more than just a few AMD fans screaming at their monitor, but you can flash the 5700 with an XT BIOS. And yes, that is true. I'll touch on that now. Please stop hugging that printout of Lisa Su and calm down. It's going to be okay. Let's talk about BIOS flashing. So recently I benchmarked a 5700 that I flashed to a 5700 XT BIOS and then manually overclocked it. Doing so, I found on average, you're looking at about a 10% boost in performance, though I should note there is some risk associated with flashing a graphics card's BIOS, and it's not nearly as simple as just firing up your favorite tuning utility and cranking up the clock frequency. Anyway, if you're willing to take on the challenge and you're tech savvy enough to pull it off, then yeah, you can unlock quite a bit more performance from an RX 5700 graphics card. Again, doing so will unlock on average around 10% more performance, with examples as high as 15%, but this will also increase your power consumption quite drastically. We saw increases by up to around 30%, and this of course does cause the card to run hotter and therefore generate more noise, but hey, that's overclocking for you. And before sealing the deal on a flashed 5700, it is worth noting that you can boost the performance of an RTX 2060 Super by about 8% with a basic core and memory overclock using a utility such as MSI Afterburner, or I guess AMD's Wattman if that happens to be working at the time. This means with both GPUs overclocked to the max, the performance margin will be reduced to just 1 to 2% in Nvidia's favor, making the 5700 even better in terms of value. As for which way you should go, it really comes down to pricing in your region and what AIB models are available. Assuming the RTX 5700 is $50 US cheaper, or whatever that equates to in your local currency, then I think I'd get the 5700, then flash it with an XT BIOS for a bit of fun, and of course that extra performance. But be aware, once you get within $20 US of the RTX 2060 Super, the Nvidia GPU becomes the better choice in my opinion. So be mindful of that when looking at AIB models. For example, I'd rather have a base model 2060 Super than a premium RX 5700. Apart from price and performance, there aren't any other factors swaying me in one direction or the other. Nvidia want me to push ray tracing support as a selling point for the RTX 2060 Super and believe it will be more useful within 12 months time. I, on the other hand, don't believe that for a second, and I feel it's woefully underpowered to take advantage of ray tracing, especially in modern titles. So at this point in time, I won't be pushing ray tracing support as a selling point for the 2060 Super. But for those of you wondering why I hadn't mentioned ray tracing up until this point in the video, well, that's the reason why. More than happy to be proven wrong in 12 months time, but I think we know how likely that's going to be. And on a similar note, Tim will be doing a sort of ray tracing update video looking at the 2060 Super, the 2070 Super, and I think the 2080 Super as well in a couple of games, some updates to Metro, the new Control game, things like that to see how ray tracing is progressing. Moving on, as a side note, there's also the outgoing RTX 2060, so that's the non-super model, and at the time of making this video, those cards can be had for around $350 US, so the same price as the RX 5700. However, they're around 9% slower than the 5700, so unless you can get them for around $310 US, it doesn't really make sense. And then there's also the GTX 1660 Ti, but that's really a performance tier below the cards here. So if you're considering, or if you're looking for, RX 5700 / 2060 Super light performance, you're probably not going to be interested in a 1660 Ti. And that is going to do it for this one. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button. It was a huge amount of work. You can subscribe for more content. And if you appreciate the work we do here at Hardware Unboxed and you want to get more involved with the channel, then head over to our Patreon page. You can join our exclusive Discord chat, monthly live streams, and a few other cool perks. Also, we do have merch now. I'm wearing a light hoodie, so you can check that out. We've also got a cool mug. It's up there somewhere. And yeah, above all else, thank you for watching. I'm your host, Steve, and I will see you again next time.